Our next personality theory, called trait theory, focuses less on the development of the personality and more on kind of the individual components of our personality. So, Gordon Allport is the father of trait theory. And traits, he said, are these relatively stable personality characteristics that exist within us and guide our thoughts and our behaviors under different types of conditions or in different situations. And he proposed the idea that there are three types of traits: cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. A cardinal trait is a dominant trait. It's a trait that completely dominates an individual's personality, so that it's the first thing you think of when you think about that person. Not all of us have these types of dominant traits, but couple examples would be if I say Lincoln, what is a trait that comes to mind? Someone may say, honesty. Einstein, what word comes to mind? You may think of brilliance or genius. Ebenezer Scrooge, greedy. Hitler, ruthless and depraved. So again, not all of us have these types of cardinal or dominant traits, but those are some examples, and you see some examples here in the graphic as well. So a cardinal trait would be, I think of someone, and the first trait that comes to mind. Central traits, however, we all have. These are the traits that are kind of the building blocks of our personality. So examples of central traits are, we're smart, kind, outgoing, aggressive, relaxed, grumpy, shy. Secondary traits are situational. So you might have an individual who is normally really easygoing, but maybe under certain circumstances, like if they have to get up and talk in front of an audience, might become very anxious. Okay? So again, cardinal traits dominate an individual's entire personality. Central traits are the building blocks of our personality. Secondary traits, situational. These are things that can change depending upon the situation. Probably the most scientifically tested, the most scientifically supported trait theory is called five-factor theory, or the Big Five. The Big Five theory holds that there are 5 dominant personality characteristics, and we can all be plotted along a spectrum for each of these characteristics. So you are going to be doing like a very abbreviated version of the 5-factor inventory in class to see where you fall on these different spectrums for the 5 traits for the Big Five theory. There is a really easy acronym that you can use to remember the Big Five traits, and that is OCEAN. Or you can use the word canoe, because they're all the same letters, right? So the Big Five traits are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, I've also seen neuroticism expressed as negative emotionality. So the N is the same, but instead of neuroticism, negative emotionality. Because an individual who might score high on neuroticism, like myself, for example, may be very anxious, very prone to like negative interpretations, could become easily tense, very sensitive. Okay? Whereas someone who scores low on neuroticism would be someone who's not very easily bothered, who's pretty emotionally resilient and pretty secure. So, coming back up to the top for openness, an individual high in openness, welcomes new challenges and new experiences, is very intellectually curious, whereas someone who's lower on the openness spectrum might be much more, kind of rational and practical and skeptical and not really wanting to embrace a whole lot of new ideas or new opportunities. Conscientiousness refers to how disciplined an individual is, how organized they are, how responsible they are. So someone who's high on conscientiousness is going to exhibit these types of behaviors, whereas someone who's lower on conscientiousness might be a lot more relaxed, less organized, not super rule driven or routine driven, more spontaneous and easygoing. The word extroversion you might already have some familiarity with. So an individual who's very extroverted, that means not necessarily that they want to be around people all the time, but they draw energy from being around other people. So they're outgoing. They tend, again, to like seek a lot of new situations, be very active. Whereas individuals low on extroversion or who may be more introverted draw energy from within, from, times when they're quiet, in solitude, doing things independently. And finally, agreeableness. An individual high in agreeableness might be very cooperative and friendly and affable and kind, whereas someone more low on agreeableness might be less cooperative, more antagonistic, more like suspicious of new people and new situations. So again, this is all on a spectrum. So we're not either like high on openness or low on openness. We can fall anywhere on this particular spectrum. And we'll do this together in class. You can kind of plot the results from the inventory that we do in class so we can see where everybody in the class, anonymously of course, falls on each of these spectrums for the Big Five. So research in the Big Five has shown something called the maturity principle, that as we age, we tend to become more conscientious and more agreeable, less neurotic, meaning we're becoming a little more emotionally stable as we age. The heritability, remember that term, right? It's the a probability estimate of the extent to which, or rather the probability that variation in a particular trait is due to genetics or the environment. So heritability is about 40% for each of these dimensions. So, there are lots of genes that are associated with each of these traits, all of which, have relatively small effects, but there's definitely environmental factors that are also at play in these traits expressing themselves in our behavior and our mental processes. Individuals who are high in conscientiousness, interestingly enough, tend to have larger frontal lobe areas, which is really, makes sense if we think about the job of the frontal lobes being our executive functioning, like planning and organization, right? Individuals who are high on neuroticism, brains are wired to experience stress very intensely. Now, remember, we have to be careful about something because this is correlational. We don't know if it's these particular characteristics of their brains that are causing them to express these traits, or if it's the other way around, right? Are these parts of the brain different because they already possess these personality traits and that they're expressing these behaviors? Because we know about neuroplasticity, right? We know how malleable the brain is. There's no association between birth order and personality. So regardless of, what you've heard about certain characteristics of the oldest or the middle or the youngest child or whatever, there's really not research that's supporting that. And finally, our traits are good at predicting our behavior. For example, an individual who is outgoing and conscientious and agreeable is probably telling the truth. They're going to be likely to tell the truth because they possess those particular traits. So I haven't mentioned it yet, but the names that you should associate with this Big Five model are Paul Costa and Robert McCrae, which I will have in your notebook for you. And the way that we measure these particular traits is on a test called the NEOPI, which has been revised. So it's the NEOPIR. Excuse me, that is the personality inventory that measures the Big Five traits.